Hi everybody, welcome back to Lifting the Lamp. I've prepared a very special video for you today. I'm going to tell you the story of when I entered the state of Samadhi for the first time in my Raja Yoga meditation practice. To be more exact, the state of Savikalpa Samadhi, or the Samadhi of form. And it is my hope that in me sharing my experience with you in the form of a story, that you will better be able to understand what the state of Samadhi is like. And perhaps if you are on the path towards trying to reach that state of Samadhi yourself, you will have an idea of, if not what to expect, then at least what it was like for me, from my own point of view, to enter that state. So just to let you know before I go further, I'm going to be using a lot of jargon from Raja Yoga in this presentation. So if you're going to be confused by the meaning of words such as dhyana or dharana, I would recommend that you watch my videos on those topics beforehand in my playlist on yoga on the channel. So, as I said in my previous video on Samadhi, I began my practice of Raja Yoga in 2017, around mid-2017. I was practicing at first daily and then several times a week after that for several months. And then in December of 2018, around the time that Hanukkah fell that year, auspiciously enough, I finally, for the first time, attained a Samadhi state in a Raja Yoga meditation. The conditions of the meditation were that I was burning incense, I was augmenting the meditation practice a bit with the use of binaural beats that I was listening to encourage my mind to resonate at a theta wave frequency, which deviates a bit from traditional Raja Yoga practice but can help in meditation. I started off with dharana. I had a bit of a shaky dharana at first, and then I was able to resume the practice until I entered dhyana. And I maintained dhyana. I maintained that absorption and deepened my absorption in the state of dhyana meditation further and further. There were a few thoughts trying to come in and interrupt that, but they didn't manage to shake me off my resolve, and they didn't manage to break my absorption. As the dhyana progressed, about, say, 25 minutes into it, although it was difficult to keep track of time in a state of meditation, I started to experience auditory and visual phenomena. So at this point in my practice, I experienced an auditory hallucination, for lack of a better term. I heard what can only be described as an angelic choir. And I have to emphasize as well, this wasn't something that I imagined. It was something which was audible to me. It was like when you hear a voice or a sound in a dream. It was as though I was hearing it. I wasn't just imagining it. And the closest thing that the sound was similar to, I would say, would be the sound that plays during 2001 A Space Odyssey whenever they show images of the monolith. And that's sort of what it sounded like. That was sort of like what this sound that I heard was like. And shortly after this auditory phenomenon began, I had a vision. I entered a vision of being in a great pale blue expanse. It was a pale blue void that went on forever and shone brilliantly as though with its own light. and it was a very beautiful thing to behold. And at this point in the practice, I knew that I could get stuck. I knew that I could get sucked in by the beauty of the auditory and visual phenomena that I was experiencing. But I felt that there was value in those experiences, and if I just brushed them off and ignored them completely, then maybe the practice wouldn't develop as far as it could. So I formulated a spirit of detachment to those phenomena, but I allowed them to lead me where they will. And as I focused on those phenomena, they pulled me deeper and deeper into a meditative state until I began to approach the threshold of a new state of consciousness. And as this was happening, the visuals and the visions continued to develop. So I then entered a new kind of vision. This time, I was in an otherworldly landscape. I can't quite describe it, but the closest thing that it was like being in a giant cavern of a cave. Only it was very well lit, and the walls of the cave were made from something like brilliant sapphire. And I was immersed in this environment. And then from the roof of the cave came this pure spring water. It was like a shower of pure water that came down from the top of the cave and washed over me. And I remember feeling a great sense of refreshment and relief as this heavenly water showered down on me in the vision. And I continued with the spirit of absorption, but with detachment, as I had before. And I continued in this way in the vision. And then it developed again. So the visuals disappeared, and I was just in a state of just no thoughts going through my mind. Just a calm, empty mind. But now there was a olfactory kind of phenomenon that arose spontaneously. So I was sitting in the vision, and suddenly I was hit with this fragrance that was like a sweet, sweet perfume. It was different to the fragrance of the incense that I was using. It wasn't... The only way that I can describe it is like a pure sweetness. Sweetness that was not mixed with any other kind of fragrance. Like a very, very refined sort of perfume. And it was very subtle, but it seemed to permeate the room. And then there was another phenomenon that arose, which was another auditory phenomenon. So now the choir that I had heard, which was kind of overlaying the theta waves that were playing in the background, gave way to a new auditory phenomenon, which, having read other accounts of phenomena in meditation, is probably the phenomenon of hearing a rolling thunder type sound, but I wouldn't quite describe it as thunder. I'd describe it more as like a tape being slowed down very quickly. So it was like a kind of a roaring sound going through my head, but it was dropping dramatically in pitch, and then it would reach a very low frequency, and then the sound would repeat again, dropping down again into a low pitch. And so this continued, and this roaring, rapidly dropping sound filled my awareness. It completely captivated me, and it seemed to pull me down with it into deeper and deeper states of trance. And then, after this had occurred for some time, what felt for a few minutes, then my state of consciousness suddenly changed dramatically. And this is when I entered a state of samadhi. Although I'd been experiencing a lot of phenomena, visual, auditory, olfactory, that were the result of a deep dhyana state until now, all of that dropped away and there was nothing. There was just blackness. Everything faded to black. And not only that, but even my awareness of self disappeared. So it's like I suffered memory loss. It's like I forgot who I was for a moment. Or not only that, but I even forgot that I was an individual. I was just awareness in the blackness. But I do remember feeling a great sense of calm and feeling like my work was over, like there was nothing more to do except to enjoy the experience that was unfolding. And this state deepened even more. This state of calm and tranquility deepened even more until it was almost like I was unconscious. I was barely awake, and it was as though I was experiencing a dreamless sleep, but consciously. And this state, it was very beautiful, very relaxing, but only lasted for a few seconds. And then thought started to try and assert itself again. But a curious thing happened at this point. Every time a thought entered into the meditation, there was nothing for it to connect to. It's like when you have two train carriages, you know, like the old-fashioned trains, in order for one carriage to connect to the other, there needs to be a coupling mechanism that goes like that. And then for one carriage to connect to the other, it needs to click in with that coupling mechanism. But to extend the analogy to what my thoughts were doing, it was as though thought was trying to connect to my awareness without that coupling mechanism. So although it was butting against my awareness, there was no way for it to become attached, because I still had no sense of self for a reference point for this thought to become associated with myself. Very bizarre and very hard to describe. And to the extent that thoughts were starting to enter my consciousness again, it was like I was on the outside of my mind looking in. And the thoughts were something foreign, which had nothing to do with the consciousness that was observing them. Very strange. And then the state started to wane some more, and eventually the track for the theta waves came to an abrupt halt. I had begun the theta wave track so that it would finish after 40 minutes, so I could time a 40-minute meditation. And so I knew then that the time for the meditation was over. And I came out of the meditation. And then I had a chance to observe my state coming out of the meditation. So the first thing that I encountered coming out of this meditation, I was in the room that I used for meditation practice at the time, which was a very small study in a very small unit. There was a very thin wall separating me from the unit next door, and there was a family in there with a young child, and the child was crying, and there was a plane flying overhead, so there was all this commotion happening, which would have usually disturbed me if I was trying to enter a tranquil state. But none of these things disturbed me at all. I registered that they were occurring, but they couldn't shake the incredible peace that I had. And the way that I described this experience in my journal at the time was to say that it was like the sky had opened up and loving kindness was shining down on me from the heavens. So then I went downstairs and more time passed, and I observed my state further. So I sat on the couch downstairs and I just enjoyed the state. I wasn't worried about anything. I was just at peace. There was nothing going through my head. I was just enjoying the moment. And then my girlfriend at the time, now my wife, saw me, and she noticed that my eyes looked funny, that I looked half asleep, and that she knew that something had happened. And so she said, "What's happened to you?" And I told her that I'd had a very deep meditation. And I found it very interesting that she picked up on something being very different about my disposition after the experience. And so I asked her to describe it for me. What do you think is so different about me? And then she said, "It seems like you're half asleep," or in fact, "It seems like you're not really there, that you're a different person." And when she said that, I kind of joked that, in a sense, I wasn't really there. Because, of course, I'd shed the state of my ego in the samadhi state, and I was starting to get an idea of what it was like to be completely outside of that experience and to just be pure awareness. And so that is how I experienced samadhi. I enjoyed that state for a few more hours after the meditation, and then things resumed as normal in my life. But it was an unforgettable experience, and I was very grateful for having been able to experience that state of samadhi at last, after working so hard to achieve it with my months of Raja Yoga practice beforehand. So I hope that's given you some insight into what it can be like to enter a state of samadhi. I'll do another video on my experience and the story of me entering the second stage of samadhi, Savikalpa Samadhi, which happened some 2 years later. So that's coming up. If you've enjoyed this video format, me telling a story about my own spiritual development, then you'll definitely enjoy my upcoming video on my experience of Savikalpa Samadhi. But what's your experience been? If you've got any experiences of samadhi or meditation that you'd like to share, please comment down below. And of course, hit that subscribe button for more content like this. Thank you again for listening, and I'll see you next time.